want to learn how to play bebop piano like that? Well, many teachers would tell you that you first need to learn your bebop scales before you can play piano like this, but I think a better approach to getting started playing in this style is to learn your upper and lower neighbor concept, and that's what I'm going to teach you in today's lesson. So let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, the first step to playing bebop piano is to learn the most common progression in jazz music. It's called the 2-5-1. So we're briefly going to talk about this chord progression, and then I'm going to teach you the best scales to use, and then the upper and lower neighbor concept. So the 2-5-1 is a very simple chord progression. We're going to play this in the key of C. First chord is a D minor 7 chord. It's built on the second note of the C major scale, so we call it a 2 chord. Okay? Then we go to the 5 chord, that's going to be your G7, and then we go to our 1 chord, which is C major 7, and then we're going to add one more chord called a C6 just to fill it in so we have 4 full measures. Okay, so once more, 2, 5, 1, 1. Okay, so it's a very simple chord progression. All right, before we move on, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this. All right, step number 2 is to play the chords in a more interesting way. And most jazz musicians will not play these big block chords like this. Instead, they'll play something like this. Instead of playing these kind of big bulky chords, they'll play just 2 notes from the chords. We call these chord shells, and it's a much easier way to maneuver between chords. So first chord, D minor 7, we're just going to play the D and the F. Second chord, G7, we play the G and the F. And then the C chord, we're going to play the C and the E. Okay, they're chord shells because we're only playing 2 notes from the complete chord. Now it's fun to put a little groove on these chords. One of my favorite grooves is the Charleston groove. It's super simple. Basically, I'm going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, so kind of practice this in your left hand. You want to get nice and comfortable with this before you start adding your scales. All right, are you ready for the next step? The next step is to learn the best scale to get started in the bebop style. And many pianists would tell you, you need to learn all these bebop scales. So on the D minor 7 chord, you need to learn your minor bebop scale, and your G7 chord, they would tell you, well, you need to learn your G dominant bebop scale. And what happens is you end up having to learn all of these different scales. And this can be very overwhelming for a student who's just getting started playing bebop piano. So in my opinion, the best place to start is actually to use only one scale when you're playing bebop, and that is your C major scale, okay? So your C major scale is all white notes, and the beautiful thing is this scale actually sounds really good on the 2-5-1 chord progression. Right? So that's kind of the best place to start with bebop, is just use your C major scale and you'll get some really nice sounds. But here's the problem. If you're just playing white notes on the 2-5-1, it's a nice place to start, but your solo can start to sound a little bit vanilla, and you might want to get some more interesting sounds in your solo. And so this is the next step, and I would say the most important step to playing bebop piano is to start using upper and lower neighbors. And this is where you can start to get some black notes in your improvisation. Isn't that a cool sound? And so I'm using this upper and lower neighbor concept to get these sounds. So what am I doing? Well, I'm first going to explain upper and lower neighbors, and then I'm going to teach you a little exercise to practice these. So upper and lower neighbors are basically when you target one of our chord tones by using a neighboring tone, either a half step below or a half step above that chord tone. So for example, on the D, if I wanted to target that D in my solo, I can target it by coming up to it from the lower neighbor. It's just a half step below the D. Okay, so that's the lower neighbor, and then we have an upper neighbor, which is a half step above. And you can do this on all of your chord tones. So for the F, you come down a half step to the note, and then if you want to come down from an upper neighbor, you do like that. Same with the A, right? Lower neighbor to A, upper neighbor to A, and then same with the C, lower neighbor to C, upper neighbor to C. Okay? And so the first thing to do if you want to use lower and upper neighbors is to actually practice the lower and upper neighbors for each one of your chord tones. And so I put a little exercise together here for you. This is the D minor 7 exercise where you basically start on the lower neighbor and then you grab your chord and then go to the upper neighbor. And then on the F, lower neighbor, upper neighbor. And then on the A, lower neighbor, grab the note, upper neighbor. And then on the C, and we finish like that. Okay, and if you were to speed this up, and this will really help you start to see these lower and upper neighbors. Now you can also do this exercise on the other chords. So on the G7, same thing. We have a lower neighbor to G, upper neighbor, and then for the B, we have a lower neighbor, upper neighbor, and then the D, same thing, and then the F, like this, okay? And again, you want to speed this up. Just like this, okay? And then finally, we play our C major 7 chord, which is going to be down below. And again, we want to target our chord tones. These are our chord tones with the lower and upper neighbors. So we start with the B below C, and then the E, and then the G, and then the B natural, like this, okay? And again, you can speed it up. All right, you're doing a great job, and in the next step, I'm gonna show you how you can use these upper and lower neighbors to start improvising your own lines. But before we do this, if you're enjoying this lesson and you wanna do a deep dive on upper and lower neighbors, check out our course 251 Soloing with Upper and Lower Neighbors. In this course, we do a deep dive on this concept, and I show you a bunch of great exercises, plus examples for how to use these ideas in your solo. So I'll put a link to that course below. All right, congratulations. You are ready to start improvising your own lines using upper and lower neighbors. Now, many teachers would jump into the final step of having you improvise over the full 2-5-1, but I think it's a lot better to actually just focus on each chord using upper and lower neighbors before you improvise on the full 2-5-1. So that's exactly what we're gonna do here. We're gonna focus on each chord and build some lines. So our first chord is D minor 7. And so here's the basic idea. I'm going to play the C major scale, which is basically all of the white notes. If you started the scale on D, you would call it D Dorian, but just keeping things simple, you can think of it as the C major scale. And anytime you are approaching one of the chord tones, like the F, you could use an upper or a lower neighbor to target that note. So as an example, if I'm going up to my F, I can come up to the upper neighbor to F and then land on the F, okay? Or let's say I'm coming down. Let's say I'm coming down from that C and I'm coming down to the A, which is a chord tone. I can use the upper neighbor to the A. Or I could kind of surround the note and use the lower neighbor to A. Okay? And that's the basic idea of upper and lower neighbors. Anytime you're coming up to a chord tone, you can use the upper note or the lower note. Now, oftentimes when I'm coming down, I'll use an upper neighbor to one of the notes. For example, if I'm coming down to my C, which is the 7, I'll use an upper neighbor to the C. Or if I'm going up the piano, and let's say I'm starting on the F, and I'm targeting the A, well, I'll use the lower neighbor to A, which is the A flat or G sharp. All right, so let's go ahead and practice some little lines on the D minor 7. The first line is the notated line here in the lesson sheet music. It goes like this. Okay, really cool little line. It's actually not too hard to play. So for this line, we're starting on the 3rd, the F. I'm going to use an upper neighbor to F. We're going to walk it up, and then I'm going to grab the C, walk it down, and I'm going to use a lower neighbor to A. Okay? That's it. And so this is what I recommend that you do, is just practice creating your own lines on the D minor 7 chord. Here's another example line. Okay, what I did there is I came down from the A, and I did a little enclosure, which is actually an upper neighbor and a lower neighbor. And so in this case, upper neighbor, lower neighbor to F, and then I continue down the piano, okay? I'll do a couple more lines. Here's another one. And so this is how you should practice building your lines. Now I encourage you to do this for each chord, so you can do the same thing on the G7. Here's a little example line on the G7. Okay, really nice little line. And so for this line, I'm starting on my high G, and then I'm using the upper neighbor to F, and then I'm continuing down, and then I'm using a lower neighbor to D, okay? And then we end our line B, G, upper neighbor to F, and we land on F, okay? So really nice little lines here. Here's a couple more examples on G. Okay, and here's another line. And so you really want to practice each of these lines. By the way, you can play short lines like when I'm playing. You can also play longer lines. Right? That was a pretty long line, so have fun with each of your lines. And then the final step I recommend is to practice lines on your C major 7 chord. So here's the little example line. Okay, pretty nice little line here. Basically, I'm just playing my C major chord, starting on the E, lower neighbor to G, okay? And actually for this one, I'm gonna do a little surround here, okay? So F sharp, A, and then we finally resolve to the G. So you can think of it as a lower neighbor, except we're gonna delay the resolution by going to the A, and then we continue up to the C sharp, upper neighbor to C, and then we come down G, and then lower neighbor to E with the D sharp up to E, okay? Here's a couple more lines on the C major chord. And here's another one. Okay, lots and lots of really cool ways to improvise over each of these chords. All right, you're ready for the final step, which is to combine all of your chords for your 2-5-1 chord progression. And now you should be able to start using your upper and lower neighbors in your lines. So first thing is I encourage you to simplify your left hand to play your simple chord shells. This way you can focus on your right hand and practice improvising some nice lines. And basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna play any of the white notes as your scale, but anytime you're approaching a chord tone, you can use an upper or a lower neighbor. So here's a little example line that you could play on the 2-5-1. I'll play it and then I'll break down what I'm doing. Right? Really cool little line, and I'm basically just using the C major scale with some upper and lower neighbors. Okay, so here's what I just did. Started on my D minor 7 chord on the high F, walked it down, lower neighbor to D. I'm gonna do a little surround on the D, and then we're gonna come down, and we need to go to our G7 chord. I'm gonna use a lower neighbor to the B, right? Sounds nice. Kind of outlining the G chord. And I'm gonna use an upper neighbor to the F, that's the 7th of the chord. And now we're gonna resolve to C. Let's see if we can go to that G, which is the 5th of the chord. We're gonna use an upper and a lower neighbor to the G, and then we're gonna come up in triplets, and then we're gonna walk it up, lower neighbor to E, do a little surround there, and we're gonna end upper neighbor to C. Okay? And so this is the way that I like to think of these lines. And so as you speed up your lines, you can get some really nice sounds. Here's another example line, and then we're gonna play with the backing track. Here's how this one goes. Doesn't that sound amazing? And once again, I'm just using the white notes from the C major scale with these upper and lower neighbors targeting the chord tones. So we're starting on the D minor 7 chord, and I'm just walking up the full chord like this. I'm using my thumb on the C, and then I'm using the upper neighbor to D, and I'm surrounding that D like that, okay? Now we go to our G7 chord. Isn't that nice? Lower neighbor to G. I'm gonna delay the resolution and I'm gonna surround it going A, A flat, G. There's our chord tone. And then I'm gonna come down, and then I'm gonna use the lower neighbor to E because we're going to a C major chord. So we do a little surround there. And then our C major chord, we're just gonna come up the notes. I kind of outline a C6 coming down like this. And then we're going to use a lower neighbor to the A, which is a chord tone from the C6 chord. So we come a G sharp, B, A, little surround there. And then we go E, and then a lower neighbor to G, that's our F sharp, and we do another surround there to the E. Okay, so this is a little more of an advanced sounding line. We're using a lot of surround notes. Also, we're anticipating chord tones by going to the upper and lower neighbors early, but it sounds really nice when you speed it up. All right, let's practice improvising some lines over the included backing tracks. This lesson comes with 12 downloadable backing tracks, plus you can download the lesson sheet music you're seeing up here on the top left of the screen. You can even change the key of this entire lesson with the click of one button with our smart sheet music. So I'll put a link to all of that below, and let's go ahead and play with the backing track. We'll do it nice and slowly, and here we go. Okay, starting on the D minor chord, let's start nice and simple. There's our line. Do a couple more. Once you have it at that tempo, you're going to want to speed it up. And once again, if you want to learn more of these tricks for improvising your lines, check out our full-length course on upper and lower neighbors. I'll put a link to that below. And here we go. We're going to play this at 130 BPM. This is a medium tempo. Here we go. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the lesson, please let me know in the comments, and be sure to check out pianowithjonny.com. We have over 1,000 step-by-step lessons for all playing levels where you'll learn your favorite songs, styles, and how to improvise at the piano. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.